Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war frontline update for the 10th of April 2023. Let's go to where we normally start. The Ukrainian figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Lots of conversation about this given the leaks. In fact, as I'm going to be talking quite a bit about the leaks that have been hitting the news over the last couple of days in this video. But the Ukrainians do say that 670 liquidated personnel were lost yesterday. All the usual caveats apply to this, of course. Now, I find this interesting for looking at trends. We see an uptick of a couple of hundred from the day before and over the last few days. So we're moving back towards the 1,000 mark where the figures have been previously. We've seen a lull over the last possibly week, given claims of culmination and the weather interfering. But that I don't know whether this signifies that there's a change in intensity on the front lines or whether particular things have happened in certain places, whether troop accumulations have been hit by Ukrainian HIMARS or whatever. I don't know. So 1 tank, 4 APCs, that's fairly low. 10 artillery systems is it's been a consistently fairly high number going on with artillery systems. I've been talking about explicit counter-battery measures that have been taken, explicit targeting of artillery for, ahead of the counter-offensive, but also because they are the most dangerous pieces of kit that both sides have in terms of what kills most people. 1 MLRS, 11 drones. There was a few drones that went overnight, a few Shahed drones that have been aimed at several places around Ukraine. 5 vehicles and fuel tanks and 2 pieces of special equipment. That has been fairly high recently, special equipment. It looks like the Ukrainians have been specifically aiming at, radar, counter-battery radar, or just air defense radar systems, as well as artillery systems. Indeed, when we look at artillery systems, this is a D20. I'm just showing you this because this is quite some massive explosion. That's just being hit by apparently an M777, so a Western supplied howitzer. Takes out the enemy, the Russian howitzer here, a fairly old howitzer, but obviously with a bunch of ammunition. Even though some of these bits of kit are old, if you're just wanting to lob lead into the air at the enemy within a fairly reasonable range, then a D20 howitzer is going to do that job. So you need to take them out just as much as you do other pieces of equipment, I guess. Right. According to the leak, there have been numbers of casualty losses, and bear in mind the leak refers to figures up to the end of February. According to one of the documents, Russian forces have suffered 189,000 to 223,000 casualties as of February, including as many as 43,000 troops killed in action. So the question is, does that include DPR and LNR losses? Does it include Wagner losses? And then we get back to the good old conversations about whether the liquidated personnel figures that the General Staff released, do they include casualties or do they not? People in my threads are still saying, oh, this includes casualties, and others saying these don't. And there have been really definitive claims from the people making these claims either way on this. And it's still somewhat open. My thoughts were actually these were dead. These are killed in action. As you can see, the total numbers are closer to the numbers, including, the casualty numbers, but casualty is a technical term that means wounded and killed, and much higher than the troops killed, as according to the leaked documents. Ukraine, on the other hand, has suffered 124,000 to 131,000 casualties, with up to 17,500 killed in action, the report says. Personally, that sounds rather low to me, or for both sides. This is, of course, from February. We have had a month and a half since then, but when I don't know what the numbers are. I think it's going to be such a difficult job to guesstimate death. So if you're sending a missile or some artillery, you can't see where it goes. You don't necessarily have drone footage, but even if you do have drone footage, it hits a building or it hits whatever base, who knows, a trench. you're guessing how many people died. You're not going down and actually counting these people on the ground. You're either not seeing it at all, or you're seeing it from afar, and you're going, "Well, I think there were 10 people there, and out of those 10 people, that shell's maybe killed 4 of them." It's a really vague. It's going to be there's going to be a huge uh, area of elbow room here when guesstimating deaths and wounded. And are those people wounded enough to be taken out of the war for the short term or medium term, or are they, patch them up and give them a gun and send them back in? Really, it's going to be so difficult to get any kind of accuracy with these figures. But anyway, the ratio of losses according to those leaked figures suggests that the Russians are losing 1 to 4.4 or 1 to 5.2, so 1 to 5 killed to wounded, whereas the Ukrainians are losing 1 to 7, 1 to 7.5. Though, if those figures are at all accurate, then they suggest that more Russians are dying and than the Ukrainians in terms of the ratio to killed to wounded, which suggests that the medical provision for the Russians is worse than it is for Ukrainians. This is something we've been talking about for a long time. Other people have been saying it's 1 to 1.5 in some places for the Russians, whereas it's 1 to 7 for the Ukrainians. There are so many different figures. What is the true number? I don't know. So I normally go back to loads of people have died, and I think loads more Russians have died than Ukrainians. Am I going to put a number on it? Not really. When I report these numbers, what they tell me whether yesterday was significantly worse than the day before, and is whether it's significantly above or about the average for the war. And that tells me whether yesterday was an intense day or not. When it comes to the piece of equipment, again, it might not be the exact number, but it's a kind of trend. For example, it looks like the Ukrainians are aiming at artillery systems, because if we look over the last 2 weeks, artillery systems have been significantly high in the number of losses, so on and so forth. When it comes to things like planes at the moment, that's a lot more accurate, because when it's only one system that's one airframe that's taken out, and you're getting video footage of that, then it's kind of like, okay, that's pretty accurate. I think previously aircraft has been well overstated for the Ukrainians, but I think more recently it's much more accurate. Anyway, it's worth getting that out of the way again. Right, the Kyiv Independent has a report saying that Syrsky, who is the Colonel General commander of the Ukraine's land forces and Eastern Operational Command, so around the Bakhmut area, is saying the enemy has switched to the so-called Syrian scorched earth tactics. It destroys building and military positions with airstrikes and artillery fire. So we are now in Bakhmut. We are seeing many more images like this, which is Mariinka 2.0. We are seeing the approach that they had in Syria, which is bomb the heck out of a town so that it's reduced to rubble, rather than what the Wagner were doing previously, which is human waves, very much doing it on the ground and taking territory with an attritional kind of warfare that leads to huge losses for the Russians, but it does lead to gains in territory eventually. The idea for the Ukrainians is that's worth it for them. They would cede territory if the Russians are losing that amount of troops. Well, Wagner didn't have, I don't think, as many airframes and as many pieces of mechanized equipment as a conventional Russian army do. And as we've seen the Wagner culminate, we've seen the conventional army take the baton and start to have greater prevalence in the Bakhmut area. And with that, we might, I think Syrsky is probably quite correct here. I mean, he knows way more than I do. But it seems like with the conventional army, you're seeing them go back to their old school doctrine of flattening cities and towns, and then marching in and putting a flag on top of large conglomerations of rubble. So there seems to be actually what's happening. Melitopol seems to be targeted again by the Ukrainians. An hour ago says no reports. This was last night. Powerful explosions were reported north of Melitopol. This area has been subject to strikes a lot in the last couple of days. Indeed, last week, and in fact, actually over the months. Melitopol, Tokmak, places like that have been consistently hit by HIMARS, and I would imagine will be consistently hit over the next few weeks to a greater degree, given the probability of a counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia direction. In in Kiev region, a fire has broken out after an explosion. Rescue workers are on the spot working. It's not yet known what caused the explosion and fire. There were a couple of Shahed drones out and about last night. It could be that. They report that a residential building is on fire in the village of Frodzdiv, south of the capital. Don't have much more information than that. According to Michael McKay, the Russians have fired 2 S-300 missiles at Konstantinivka. Claim here is it's at civilian infrastructure. These are inaccurate missiles using the ground-to-ground capacity, so there is a high probability it's hit civilian infrastructure, even if they are aiming for military targets. But the general staff generally won't, and this is a source from the general staff, generally won't tell you if they hit the military targets anyway. So it's almost always that the Russians hit civilian targets, but bear in mind that that won't always be the case, right? Now, the Russians themselves, yesterday on the 9th, a Russian fighter jet fired a Kh-29 TV-guided air-to-surface missile, which hit a bridge in Chernihiv Oblast in Ukraine. The bridge is located 1.3 kilometers from the Russian border, so this is up in the north, and connects a road crossing the Sudets River leading to Bryansk Oblast. Why they would do that, I don't know. There are lots of, I mean, it's just a bit of a waste. Is that going to be impinging upon the Ukrainian ability to attack into Russia? I don't know. Or would it harm the Ukrainians' ability to move troops around in the north in case they are doing a northerly attack further to the east towards Kupiansk? But you can see that's miles away from Kupiansk. So this is only to do with going up into Russia. They're just not going to do that. So there's more chance of Russia going south, in which case Russia would have more utility from this bridge than the Ukrainians. So I don't understand. Do the Russians believe their own hype about the Ukrainians wanting to actually invade Russia? Just be such a militarily stupid thing to do. When they're concerned with taking back the territory they've lost, they are not going to be, putting troops into a completely separate offensive into Russia. But there you go. Now, Russia on fire. Earlier today, that was yesterday, a blaze at the NLMK Ural metalwork plant in Revda. And just hours later, in the village of Buzovo, a harmless grass fire was not dealt with by authorities. Consequently, 11 buildings burnt down. So metalworks is possibly more problematic than a grass fire, but then the grass fire does burn down 11 buildings. Is this anything to do with the war directly? As I always say, who knows? Is it insurance? Could be, and that reflects the difficulty in Russia, but it could also be partisan activity as well. Okay, moving on. Russian military has faced colossal losses near the towns of Avdiivka and Mariinka recently. In fact, this should be, let's put that in my odds and sods bit, because actually that's more relevant to what I'm going to talk about in a second. Right, let's get on to odds and sods and military bits and pieces. Let's indeed talk about that. Well, let's start with that anyway. Goodness me, it's all arbitrary categorization. The Russian military has faced colossal losses near the towns of Avdiivka and Mariinka in Donetsk Oblast in the recent days, losing around 2 companies of servicemen or up to 400 soldiers there each day. Ukrainian military spokesperson Oleksiy Dmytrashkovsky said on April the 9th. And in fact, this tracks with what UK intelligence has said today. UK intelligence says over the last 7 days, Russia has likely increased its armoured assaults around the Donetsk Oblast town of Mariinka. It's been fought over since 2014, largely destroyed by artillery. It commands the approaches to Donetsk and the key H15 road. Russia continues to give a high priority to resourcing operations in the broader Donetsk sector, including Mariinka and Avdiivka areas, expending significant resources for minimal gains. So this then feeds into the idea that it has been something of a black hole for Russian troops and equipment in those 2 towns. Now, Wagner forces are displayed head on a stick in Bakhmut today. I'm talking about this because it's doing the rounds. There it is, a head on a stick. It's blurred out, luckily. These people are as brutal as ISIS and should be treated in exactly the same way, says Calibre Obscure, which is one half of Ukraine Weapons Tracker. And this is following on from news from a couple of days ago. I didn't talk about this, but I did see the video. It's a video. So there's an M113 APC that's blown up by a mine, which is a Ukrainian APC blown up by a mine. And the Russian conventional troops have got there and were securing the scene, but the Wagner, it appears, have got there before them and have beheaded the Ukrainian soldiers that were in the APC and left their beheaded corpses there. There was also talk earlier in the war of beheaded Russian soldiers. Is it on this thread? There was talk. There's Telegram thread. I can't see it anyway. Of Ukrainian troops beheaded and having their hands cut off, so you can't identify them. Not quite sure why that would be something you wouldn't want to do, but anyway, this kind of activity, yes, things are horrible in war and stuff like this happens, but you don't want to get into kind of both sidesism. This is horrible. There's no need for that at all. Yeah, and that tells you kind of what you're up against. And then, yeah, so this idea, I was going to talk about it here, but I thought I'd go talk about it earlier in terms of the losses. But this kind of scorched earth approach to warfare, and this is what it looks like. The Bakhmut, of course, so I've got that in several places. Sorry about that. Ukraine has already altered some of its military plans because of the alleged highly classified Pentagon documents leak, CNN reported, referring to a source close to Ukrainian President Zelensky. Now, this is interesting. So there was talk within these leaked documents that I talked about over the last couple of days. That there was information on the makeup of Ukrainian forces. I don't know exactly what was in some of these documents, but there's talk about potential information pertaining to the counteroffensives, although I've seen denial that there was too much information on the kind of when and where. Nonetheless, there are claims, and again, this could be psyops. This is, yeah, we changed what we were going to do. We haven't really, but we've got to say we have because they think we might be doing X, Y, and Z. So there could be bluffs, double bluffs, triple bluffs, whatever. But the claim is here that as a result of these leaks, the Ukrainians have adapted and changed their plans. So Yevgeny Prigozhin has been complaining that Ukraine has prepared 200,000 to 400,000 fighters for its counteroffensives, which will begin when the ground turns dry. Goodness me, if that's true, then the Russians have got some serious problems ahead of them. I hardly think, but who knows, that the Ukrainians will be able to muster 200 to 400,000 adequately trained personnel for a counteroffensive. But yeah. Prigozhin often says things to again, it's a bit like the Ukrainians have done this approach, which is if we scare the audience, then it will scare them into acting in favor of what we want. So the Ukrainians sometimes say, oh my goodness, it's all terrible, we're in trouble, we've got nothing. And then the West they did this a little bit more earlier in the war, and then the West go, okay, we'll give you all of this stuff. They have to over egg it to kick people into more immediate action. It's completely understandable. And the same for Prigozhin. We've got a shell hunger, everything's terrible, and it's trying to get the MOD to then give Wagner PMC what he wants. And you have to over egg it in order to get the reaction from your audience. So I'm not quite sure who his audience is here, or who the eventual audience is, whether it's the Russian MOD and Putin, and what he wants out of this, whether he just wants the ability to be able to recruit more people, to get more weapons, all of this stuff, scaring people with the claim that there's going to be a huge Ukrainian army for the counteroffensive, or whether he genuinely believes that is indeed the case. Right, before we get into military aid, here's Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar says that Russian forces are carrying out uncontrolled, barbaric, industrial-scale logging in Ukraine that will, quote, inevitably lead to catastrophic consequences for the environment. Now, it's one thing seeing pictures of Bakhmut destroyed, and you think that's terrible, and it is terrible. But the thing about a city or a town is that you can rebuild it relatively easily. And actually, you could possibly do a better job. Like if you think about building a city from scratch or a town from scratch, you can make it more sustainable, more efficient, more this, more that. Like rather than having a town built up kind of organically over decades or centuries even, then if you start again, you can arguably do a better job. Anyway, you can see silver lining to the cloud of that. But the idea is you can rebuild a town fairly quickly. If you're logging entire forests, then these are ecosystems that have taken thousands of years to or perhaps millions of years to be as they are, and they've adapted to that environment. And then once you get rid of, say, the canopy, if you completely get rid of all the trees, then it's not necessarily going to be those same trees growing back up, and it takes a huge amount of time for that to happen. But you'll be changing the ecosystem completely. It could be that now life there is unable to adapt as quickly to so on and so forth. Anyway, it's the understanding of evolution. But the point is that you destroy the environment and those ecosystems, and it's not going to be a case of like, oh, we'll just rebuild that in 5 years. It's okay. We'll just build some more trees. You are ruining these areas for a much longer time, and it takes a long time for those for mature forests to grow. It's I get really sad with human deaths, of course, but I get really annoyed and angry and upset about the ecological damage being done in this war, especially when it's like purposeful like this. So it's going back to this scorched earth tactics of like, right, it's not our country, it's Ukraine, although we are claiming it's really Russia. But since it's Russia, but it's not quite where our guys live at the moment, and we're kind of like, we want to wipe these guys off the face of the earth. We might as well just completely cut down all their forests and ship their wood back to Russia and use that. It's a real scorched earth approach to warfare. Right. Okay. Moving on to military aid, humanitarian aid, and all sorts. Not too much to report again today. First footage of AS-90 155 mil self-propelled. Hey, just in case my videos are not complete unless I have an annoying bit of music just thrown out into your ears. So apologies. People say you should mute the tabs before you do this. It's really easy to do that, and I absolutely thank you for taking that on. But there's some kind of perverse joy I get of just getting annoyed with the music. Anyway, here is a self-propelled gun. There are 33 of these going to or already in or on the way to Ukraine, and this is a first footage of a British AS-90 SPH or SPG. These are fairly decent. They're decent enough. They're from the 90s, so they're a little bit old now. It's not like your Archer. It's not like your Caesar, but they are useful. They're going to be giving the Ukrainians the ability to shoot and scoot. They might not have the longest range, but good stuff. Good to see that over there. Right, Ukrainian civilians are being trained by the Swiss army in demining techniques. This is super useful because there are so many mines in Ukraine at the moment, and there will be even more. As the months go by and more mines are laid or thrown up by the artillery ammunition that can spread mines out without having to do it with a sapper unit. Now, this is you start to get headlines like this. It's in all the major newspapers pretty much today in some variation. Here's a Wall Street Journal saying Kyiv is depleting its last reserves of S-300 missiles, making it possible for Russia to achieve air superiority, according to purported Pentagon presentations. And it's not just this, they're talking about like air defense in general. Crap headline, says Thomas C. Tyner. Don't bother reading anything further than the headline, because Ukraine was running out of S-300 missiles. It received Patriot and SAMP-T batteries, which are far, far better at shooting down Russian jets. He actually does a little thread on this. So here you have what is being claimed, so that there are 192 man pads remaining. So those are your Stinger, man portable and air defense systems. There's only 190 of these remaining, and there were like thousands given. There's only 10 Iris-T missiles remaining. Only 2 missiles remain for each Buk launcher. All S-300 Buk, OSA, Iris-T, NASAMS ammo will be gone within a month. Almost all of Ukraine will have no defenses by May, and many surface-to-air missiles protect open fields. This is according to the leaked documents. New York Times, they're saying the same thing. Ukraine's air defenses are at risk unless it is fortified by a large number of additional munitions, according to leaked Pentagon documents and officials who spoke to the New York Times. Thomas E. Tyner says, hang on a second, let's not get... And again, this could be a case of yes, there's a leak, but if there are also experts saying this could be scaring the West into providing more. So there's easily enough air defense or just more air defense capability for the Ukrainians and capacity because they need it. But Thomas E. Tyner says Ukraine will never run out of air defense missiles. Ignore the scaremongering journalists who want to scare you into reading their nonsense. According to the leaked Pentagon papers on the 1st of March, Ukraine has 421 S-300 missiles and was using around 180 of these per month. So that's 180 S-300 missiles is 6 a day. They're using, which is a lot. Now, Russia they have like 8,000 of these. So that's why they're using them against places like Konstantinivka over the last 24 hours and other places. Zaporizhia gets hit with S-300s often because they just have so many of them. So Tyner says, apparently Ukraine will be out of S-300s by May, but Ukraine got 2 Patriot and 1 SAMP-T batteries. So batteries usually mean not just one launcher, but a number of launchers. 2 systems that are far, far, far superior in everything when compared to the S-300s Ukraine had. Ukraine will operate the 3 batteries at its most important sites, and they are the sites Russia attacks most often. And due to this, S-300 missile expenditure per month will drop to maybe 60 missiles. So instead of using 180 a month, they'll be using 60 a month because they'll be relying on other systems to do the job that the S-300s are doing and can do them better. Now, Ukraine will run out of them in July or August, but as Azerbaijan, Bulgaria, Egypt and Greece are quietly resupplying Ukraine with missiles, there will be enough S-300 missiles until the autumn. That's more than half a year. And in that time, 7 times NASAMS, 3 times IRIS-T, 3 times ASPEED, an undisclosed number of Hawk, more SAMP-T and Patriot batteries will arrive. At the same time, the US and Ukraine are working to mount RIM-7 Sea Sparrow missiles onto Ukrainian Buk launchers. I talked to you about this in a video, I don't know, months ago now, that these Buk launchers that they can't get the missiles for anymore, they've been able to adapt Sea Sparrow, which are usually used in anti-ship capability. They've been able to adapt these to the Buk launchers, and there are absolutely loads of these RIM-7 Sea Sparrow missiles as far as I can remember. Ukraine would be in trouble if the West wouldn't deliver new systems and batteries, but as the situation is now, no worries. Russian fighter jets will continue to be shot down every time they enter Ukrainian airspace. The real problem Ukraine has is fighter jets. For them, spares and missiles are running out, and the West has so far not sent a single F-15, 16, F-18, Eurofighter, Rafale or Gripen to Ukraine, and that is a huge problem. Right, on to geopolitics. In today's Vacnit Soup, I'll be introducing a bank well known in both Austria and Russia, Raiffeisen Bank International and its Russian subsidiary AO Raiffeisen. It is one of the few foreign banks that still continues to business as usual in Russia. I'm just going to quickly run through this thread because I think it's useful to understand. The Russian branch of Raiffeisen was founded in 1996, was expanded massively after the takeover of Russia's Impex Bank in 2006. A year later, they had become the largest bank that deals with foreign capital, 7th largest overall in Russia. During the early 2000s, the bank was operating new branches around Russia, including St. Petersburg, Samara, Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, and Krasnodar. After 2018, they focused on digital expansion, and in 2021 they had a digital presence in over 300 cities. Customer satisfaction is also high. In 2021, the American Forbes called it the best bank of Russia, and in 2018 Euromoney magazine referred to it as the best bank for private banking services for wealthy customers in Central and Eastern Europe. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, many Western companies and banks decided to leave the Russian market. In general, when banks leave a country en masse, it can have devastating consequences on its economy, which is why Putin has been doing everything in his power to disrupt these departures. Nowadays, all big exits have to be signed by Putin himself. Many Western banks left Russia actually already in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea, but some European banks, including Raiffeisen and Italian UniCredit, saw the opportunity to make some money from the war and decided to stay. Staying and continuing business as usual in Russia has been a pretty profitable deal for Raiffeisen. Around 60% of its profits, in total 2 billion euros, came from Russia. The bank holds more than 20 billion euros of Russian money. Raiffeisen's stay in Russia has faced some challenges lately, though. Recently, Russia started granting loan payment holidays to their troops who fight in Ukraine. The banks that grant these loans must write off the entire debt if these soldiers are either maimed or killed on the battlefield between September and December 2022. These write-offs were worth 800 million euros. By granting these loans, both Raiffeisen and UniCredit were complicit in funding Russia's barbaric invasion. In January 2023, US Treasury launched an investigation concerning potential breach of Western sanctions. In addition, the European Central Bank has been pushing Raiffeisen to leave the profitable Russian market. On 30th of March 2023, Raiffeisen called its critics morally arrogant and are moralizing from a, quote, risk-free zone of comfort. It's worth noting that, what reverse projection? Is that morally arrogant? No, it's just being normal moral agents. Like, you're propping up the Russian war. That's morally bad. Oh, God, you're so morally arrogant. No, I'm not. Like, if I just saw someone being murdered on the street and say, hey, that's not right, that's really horrible, then the murderer turns around and says, don't be so morally arrogant. Like, Just, It's worth noting that, sorry, rant over, very short rant today. It's worth noting that one of the most sound critics of Raiffeisen has been President Zelensky, who hardly operates from a risk-free zone of comfort. To conclude, it seems that Raiffeisen shareholders prioritize profits over Ukrainian lives. True that. And they might have to move out from Russia due to increasing international pressure. I bloody hope so. So anyway, it's just, there are still obviously many corporations operating in Russia. They need to be put under pressure. It's difficult from a individual's point of view. Like, what can I do to change that? Not a lot. I can write some things on Twitter slagging off the bank. Is that going to change anything? Utterly not. But it's about sanctions. It's about pressure from governments and institutions to stop these banks from funding the war. And pressure needs to be put on, in this case, Twitter. I already had a bit of a rant against Twitter yesterday. Like, Dmitry Medvedev is spreading genocidal, racist, disgusting stuff, right? And he is amplified because he has a blue tick. So that message gets out there more. And I'm going to say the same things, but people who are spreading news about the Ukraine war, people like myself on Twitter, are curtailed by the algorithm that Twitter has produced, which is to put Ukrainian news in the same group in its coding as misinformation, and that is then curtailed. So this guy gets amplified, and if I say something about the Ukrainian war, it gets curtailed. That is utterly, that's not free speech. Like, if Musk is a free speech absolutist, he's a liar, because he's amplifying someone who pays him more and shutting down people who are actually trying to say things, genuine things about the war. A brutal honesty in this message from the Russian Kremlin. Ukraine should be erased from the map. A country that's chairing the UN Security Council this month simply denies another country its right to exist. I think this is unique in the annals of international behavior in modern times. So TASS, the Russian news agency, saying Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev believes that no one in the world needs Ukraine. Therefore, it will cease to exist, he said in his post on social media. Just I don't want to go through the stuff he said, but you get the point. It's just heinous. Germany may ban the entry of Russian athletes even if they are admitted to international competitions, says German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser. I find this interesting. So if say the Olympics were to be held in Germany, they're not. But the idea would be that, okay, the IOC might allow athletes to compete in the Olympics, but we as Germany, as hosts, are not going to allow them to enter the country. So I think that's an interesting way of getting around some of these problems. Now, will France do the same for the Olympics? Probably not. But this is good to see a strong moral stance from Germany here. According to her, to offer Putin, quote, a stage for propaganda would mean betraying all the values of sport. And I agree. Anyway, thank you. That's today's news video. I really appreciate you being with me. And I will try and get out my usual 3 videos today. It is family are not here, or not so many of them, just the usual ones hanging around like a bad smell. Only joking. I love my boys and obviously my partner. But I will try and get out those 3 videos today. So anyway, Toodle Pip, speak later.